Welcome back. In this lecture we are going to look at applications of suffix trees. So we finished the last lecture by looking at fast methods to build suffix trees, and the strategy that we used was to use suffix array and from suffix array go to suffix tree in linear time. We went to suffix trees via LCP array. So LCP array was a helper array that we used in the construction, and we also know that with this overall method we have a n log n method to build suffix trees, because for a given text we can build suffix array using prefix doubling approaches in n log n time, and from suffix array to suffix tree we can go in linear time. However, observe that there are faster algorithms to build suffix arrays. So, for example, one can use faster linear time algorithms as well, and if one uses that, then you can, starting from your given text, you can reach to the suffix tree in linear time, right. So this gave us fast algorithms to build suffix trees, and the focus today will be on mostly on the applications of suffix trees. So when we were introducing suffix trees, we talked about exact pattern matching problem, where given a pattern it is very convenient to locate that pattern in a text using suffix tree. However, the goal of this lecture is to emphasize that suffix trees are useful for a large number of problems besides exact pattern matching. For many of these problems, sometimes they result in surprisingly efficient linear time solutions. For example, when I was discussing suffix trees, I mentioned that there is a problem, longest common substring problem, for which the best known algorithm was n log n, and after the advent of suffix trees the best known algorithm was linear time. There are other examples as well where suffix trees enable surprisingly efficient linear time solutions, for which linear time solution was not known before suffix trees came. So in this lecture we are going to look at three application examples. One is the longest common substring of two strings. Second is pattern matching in a database of strings, and third is all pairs suffix prefix problem. Now one prerequisite to understand these applications will be that generalized suffix tree. So this is a very simple extension of the suffix tree that we have studied so far. So we will define what generalized suffix tree is, and then we will see how this helps in these applications. And this is just a small number of applications. There are many applications that suffix trees enable, but these three examples will give you a flavor of what suffix trees are capable of. Now to appreciate the power of suffix trees, we will also try to understand the algorithms without suffix trees. So suppose if there is no suffix tree, what would be a naive, or what would be another algorithm that you would think of without suffix trees, and then we will see how suffix trees help and give us much faster algorithms for these problems. So let us start by understanding what generalized suffix trees are. So let me first recall what are the properties of suffix trees, right. So remember that when we define suffix tree, we defined suffix tree for a single string t. So if your text t is given that has length n, right. So if the text t has length n, then we already know that the count of leaves in suffix tree is n, the number of internal nodes cannot exceed n minus 1, total space requirement is order n, and time to build using the best available algorithm is linear, right. So if you use the best available algorithms to build suffix tree, they require linear time, and we will use this as a fact. Even though in the course we have not studied a linear time algorithm to build suffix trees, we will be using this result as a fact that suffix trees can be built in order n time. And trivial applications like checking occurrence of a pattern, which was the original application of suffix tree. So if you want to just check whether a pattern occurs in the suffix tree or not, that can be easily answered in order p time, and here we continue to assume that our alphabet size is fixed or constant. So, this was just a quick crash course on what suffix tree properties are. When we talk about generalized suffix trees, we have to think of multiple strings as input now. So, the default suffix trees are designed for only a single string that we have seen so far, but it turns out that suffix trees are also easily generalizable to multiple strings. So, for example, if you are given k strings as input s1, s2, s3 until sk, and let us say that each string has length li. We will consistently use this symbol m to denote the combined length of these strings. So, this is the summation of the lengths of all the k strings s1 till sk. The goal of generalized suffix trees is to index the suffixes of all these strings s1 till sk, so that we can allow pattern matching against all these strings. So, how do we do that? Well, would a simple solution where let us say we are given two strings a b c and b c d, let us say, can I just concatenate these strings and call it a single string and then build my suffix tree as usual? Will that be okay? Well, no, because observe that if I build a suffix tree of this string, then it will be not be possible for me to tell like whether BCB, like if I search for the pattern BCB, then the suffix tree will tell me yes, BCB occurs as a pattern in the text, but observe that it does not occur in either of the original strings. So, we have to make a slight modification here, and as you can maybe guess that we have to add some sort of separation between these strings when we are constructing or when we are combining them. So, the idea is simple, that we will concatenate these strings, but we will add some separator symbols in between them. So, we will call them special characters $1, $2, $k. These are outside my original alphabet, right, and we will assume some lexicographical ordering, because for building suffix trees and suffix arrays we always need a lexicographical ordering of these characters. So, we will assume one lexicographical ordering. Let us say that $1 is smaller than $2, $2 is smaller than $3, until $k, and then $k is smaller than all other characters in my original alphabet sigma, right. Okay. So, now with this ordering, the ordering of the suffixes can be unambiguously defined, because once we have the lexicographical ordering of the characters, I can compose any strings of these symbols and I can order them. Now, as I said, we will concatenate these strings and we are going to use these symbols as a separator symbols before concatenation. So, the way I will concatenate is S1 $1, S2 $2 until Sk $k, and after this I am going to build a suffix tree of this entire string. So, then the problem that I was mentioning in the last slide will not occur, because now we have a special symbol separating them, and now maybe when I am searching for the pattern I can use these separators to tell whether BCB occurs in the original strings or not. Okay. So, there is one final detail that we have to look at. So, here is an example of what we discussed so far. Suppose you give 3 strings AAT, TAG and GAT. Based on the previous idea that we discussed, we will build a generalized suffix tree of these strings by concatenating them and putting the separator symbols, and we are going to build this single suffix tree like we did in the last lectures. Now, one minor detail that we have to fix here is that observe that do paths from the root node to the leaf nodes spell suffixes of the original input strings. So, for example, if I look at this path from A and I go here, this path spells A T $1, TAG $2, GAT $3. But unfortunately, this is not a suffix of any of my original strings, right. So, I have to do some cleaning here, and that is very easy. All I have to do is basically look at all the labels of the leaf edges and basically remove the text after I see the first dollar symbol. So, for example, as soon as I see the first dollar symbol, I am going to remove the remaining text. So, everywhere I can do this. So, as soon as I see the first dollar symbol, I can remove the remaining text, and I do not need to do any other modification in the entire tree. This modification will only be needed at the leaf edges, where I will only preserve the text until the first dollar symbol, and the remaining characters I can remove. So, this is how the simplified tree now will look like, where all the leaf edges you can see have either $1 symbol in them, or they have $2 symbol in them, or they have $3 symbol in them, and that symbol automatically tells you that whether the corresponding suffix is coming from string 1, string 2 or string 3, right. So, here $1 symbol is telling you that this particular suffix is coming from string 1. This is AAT $1, which is the suffix corresponding to this string. Okay. So, that is a very simple definition of generalized suffix tree, that we concatenate the strings with separator symbols and we build this tree like we did before. Now, every path from the root node to the leaf node spells the suffixes of the original strings. So, how much time would this construction take, right? So, this is the last step I just mentioned. So, this is the procedure for building generalized suffix trees. How much time do we spend to build this tree? Well, the answer is easy, because all we are doing is concatenating the strings, and then we are going to apply the original suffix tree construction algorithm. The final trimming of in the step 4 is a simple linear time step. So, the time to build is basically the sum lengths of all the strings, because we know that for a given text t, suffix tree construction works in linear time. Now, in this case our text is the concatenation of all strings. So, therefore, the time to build is order summation of all the strings. And because suffix trees also occupy linear space, as we have discussed before, the space complexity also is linear in the sum of lengths of all the strings. So, this generalized suffix tree will be the basis of the applications that we are going to discuss in the remaining lecture. So, as I mentioned before, we are going to look at 3 applications, right. So, let us start with our first application, and we are going to increase the complexity of application as in the increasing order. So, the first application will be the simplest, the next application will be slightly harder, and the next application will be even slightly harder. Okay. So, the first application is pattern matching against a collection of strings. Here you are given as input a database of strings S1, S2 until Sk, and again we assume that M is the combined length of all the strings. Along with that you have a pattern string P, and the question is simple: does P exist as a substring in the database or not? So, like we were doing exact pattern matching, we are asking, does pattern P occur anywhere in any of the strings S1 until Sk or not? How do we solve this? Well, if you think of the original suffix trees way, like if we Suppose we individually construct suffix trees of S1, then suffix tree of S2, and then suffix tree of Sk. Then I can look for the patterns occurrence in all these strings by searching from the root node, right. But unfortunately that I have to do that k times, right. So, I will have to search for starting from string 1, then from the root node of second tree, and then root node of the other trees. So, this one by one procedure is unfortunately not efficient, because now we have generalized suffix tree, and then here we can build a single generalized suffix tree of all the strings S1, S2 until Sk. Now, if I want to know whether the pattern occurs or it is a pattern occurrence in the database or not, then I can start from the root node of the generalized suffix tree and continue to match all the characters of the pattern until I am able to match all the characters of the pattern. If I am able to match all the characters of the pattern, then only we have that pattern occurring in at least one of the strings. If I see a mismatch, then I know that the pattern does not occur anywhere in any of the strings, right. So, because this follows from the property that if a pattern occurs as a substring in any of the strings, then it must be a prefix of a suffix of one of the strings, and as a result all the characters must match when I start matching from the root node, right. So, build a generalized suffix tree and then follow the path for the pattern from the root node in the tree. So, if I am going to solve this problem using generalized suffix trees, then I have to, while I am analyzing runtime complexity, I have to also take into account the time I use to build a tree. So, in that case we know that the tree construction is linear time. So, we spend order m time to build a tree. The query time is order p, because we just have to match the characters of pattern, and by that we can tell whether the pattern occurs or not. So, we can give a yes or no answer. But if I also want to know all the occurrences, so suppose the answer is yes, that the pattern occurs somewhere, and I also want to report all the occurrences where exactly the pattern occurs, then I have to do slightly extra work. That is, once I am located the pattern p in this generalized suffix tree, and suppose my search ended at an internal node somewhere, or it may end at a leaf as well. So, in that case what I have to do is I have to look at the subtree below that node, and inside the subtree I have to report all the leaf nodes, because all the leaf nodes correspond to distinct suffixes in these strings. So, each leaf node corresponds to a occurrence of the pattern, and by the property we discussed before, that suffix tree follow this property that the size of the subtree will be in the order of the number of leaves in that subtree, right. So, given that property we can answer this question in p plus OCC time, where OCC is the number of occurrences, because even linear time traversal of this subtree will take order OCC time, right. Remember that the number of internal nodes in a suffix tree is not more than the number of leaves in the tree. Similarly, for this subtree as well, the number of internal nodes cannot exceed the number of leaves in the subtree. Therefore, the time we have to spend in locating the pattern until that node and then doing a linear time traversal of that subtree is order p plus OCC. Okay. So, that was the first application, and as you can see it is a very simple algorithm that can be described in just 2 lines. Let us look at another problem. This is longest common substring of 2 strings. So, what we are given is 2 strings S1 and S2 that have lengths L1 and L2 respectively. We will assume that M is their combined length L1 plus L2, as output I want to know the longest common substring of S1 comma S2. So, for example, if my string is A B C D and my second string is E B C F, then in this case the longest common substring in these two string is B C. So, how can we solve this problem? I suggest you to think different ways for solving this problem. Maybe one way can be a naive way, like what about I just exhaust, I look for all possible substrings of S2 and I check whether they occur in S1 or not. Well, that is not going to give us efficient algorithm clearly, because that brute force way is not going to work. Let us look at a slightly better way. So, how about we build a suffix tree of S1 and then I can search for all the suffixes of S2 in this suffix tree of S1. So, suppose I consider suffix tree S2 and in this case I look for all the suffixes of pattern. So, I consider all the suffixes of string S2 and I locate them in this tree. That will help because any substring must occur as a prefix of one of the suffixes. So, if I am able to look for all the suffixes and I can count the number of character matches, then at the end of the algorithm I can report the longest common substring, because that will be the maximum number of pattern matches. So, for example, here if I am able to match 10 characters and suppose I am here I am able to match 20 characters, then I easily know that this is the longest common substring from S2 to S1. Unfortunately, this is also not linear time algorithm, because if you see I have to process all the suffixes of S2 one by one. In this case the runtime will be order S1 for building the suffix tree plus order S2 square, because I am processing all the suffixes of S2 one by one. Can we do better? Well, let us see, would generalized suffix trees of strings S1 and S2 help? The answer is yes, it should give us order S1 plus S2 algorithm, that is the target, and let us see how. So, let me define this notation. So, we will say path label of a node V denoted as capital PV is the string spelled by the path from the root node to that node V. So, if my suffix tree is here, then my V node is here, then PV denotes the string spelled by the path from root node to node V. So, all that the characters along these edges, if I concatenate them, then the string spelled by that path is the path label, right. So, again in the examples here, so for example, if I look at this node, then the path label of this node is GAT$3, that is the path spelled from root node to that leaf node. Okay. So, given this path label of a node, we can also define string depth of a node. So, this is different from the depth of a node defined in a usual way, because by string depth we are counting the number of characters along that path. Some edges will have more than one characters. So, therefore, string depth can be higher than the actual depth of the node, right. So, in this case, going back to this example, in this case the string depth of this node is 3, because there are 3 characters along that path. So, actually if you also count dollar symbol, then it will be 4, that is the number of characters along that path is, if you look at this is 3, and if you look at the entire string, then this is 4, right. So, So, string depth is the number of characters along that path. Okay. So, now the linear time algorithm works as following. We will build a generalized suffix tree of strings S1 and S2. So, this will be a single string containing suffixes of S1 as well as suffixes of string S2. Now, observe that the label of each leaf node represents a suffix of either S1 or S2, right. So, each leaf node will represent a suffix of either string S1 or string S2. What we will do is we will mark every internal node with symbol 1 if it has a leaf node representing a suffix of string S1 in its subtree. So, if I have an internal node, suppose there is a leaf node that represents some suffix of string S1, then in the internal node I am going to label 1 because there is a leaf node in the subtree that represents a suffix of string S1. Similarly, if there is an internal node has a leaf node representing a suffix of string S2 in its subtree, I am going to put a label 2 or I am going to mark 2 at that internal node. Now, all that is left is the last step, that is we have to just find the maximum node with the maximum string depth in the tree. So, we have to go as far bottom as possible in terms of the string depth, that is marked 1 and 2 both. In other words, that node, so if I look at the tree, in other words I am looking for the node with the maximum string depth, and in the subtree of that node I have suffixes coming from string S1 as well as string S2, suggesting that the substring represented by this path is common to S1 and S2 both. And by looking for the node with maximum string depth, I am automatically getting the longest common substring. So, if this node represents the deepest node in the subtree, then this reflects the longest common substring. So, again the algorithm is actually very simple, right. So, and this is also linear time because suffix, this tree construction takes linear time, right, and when we are assigning these labels, all it requires is the bottom up traversal of the tree, because for each leaf node I already know whether that leaf node represents a suffix of string S1 or S2. I have to go from bottom to up, marking every internal node from a bottom up manner. So, both of these steps can be done in the size of the tree. So, the number of nodes in the tree is also order m. So, m denotes S1 plus S2. So, the number of nodes in the suffix tree is order m. So, therefore, both of these steps will take order m time. And finally, with the linear time traversal of the tree, I can also report the node with the maximum string depth, that is again done in order m time. So, therefore, the entire problem of longest common substring can be solved in only linear time by suffix trees. So, that is again a surprisingly efficient linear time algorithm that suffix trees offer, and if we try to solve this problem without suffix trees, then we will likely end up with a solution which requires more than linear time. Okay. So, I hope these two applications give you a warm up of how suffix trees are going to help, right. Now, I am going to look at a final application in this lecture, and this will be a slightly involved application. In this application, we are going to look at all pairs suffix prefix problem. So, here what we are given is a collection of strings. So, we are given a collection of k strings S1, S2 until Sk, and again m is their combined lengths. What I want as output is for each ordered pair Si Sj in S, I want to report the longest suffix prefix match of Si and Sj. So, I want to report the longest suffix of Si that matches the prefix of Sj, and this has to be done for every ordered pair Si Sj, right. So, you can imagine that the output size is k times k minus 1, because I will have to report the output as a matrix, right. So, for example, if I am given 5 sequences as input, so S1 until S2 S5, then I will have to report the output as a 5 cross 5 matrix. So, for example, this cell will tell you the longest suffix of S1 that matches prefix of S2. Similarly, this cell is also important, because this cell tells me the longest suffix of S2 that matches prefix of S1. So, these two values can be different, and the diagonal values do not matter, because I am not interested in knowing the suffix prefix match of string Si with itself. So, ignoring the diagonal values, we have to compute all these k square minus k values. Now, why is this problem important? Well, this has a biological relevance, because remember that when we were discussing in the original introduction chapter, where I mentioned that when we sequence the genome, instead of getting the entire sequence as output, what we get is millions of short strings from the large genome sequence. So, because of the technological limitations, these instruments cannot read the entire sequence, and what we get as output is millions of short strings. The length of these strings can vary depending on the instrument used, but the question that gets often asked in bioinformatics is, given these short strings, what was the original genome where these strings came from? So, that is the genome reconstruction problem. Given these strings, I want to reconstruct the unknown genome sequence from where these reads were sampled. And one way to answer this problem would be to look at suffix prefix overlaps, because as you can imagine, these strings have overlaps among them. So, similar to how we solve a jigsaw puzzle, we have to look at the overlaps among the strings and figure out the order in which they appear in the genome sequence, right. So, the first step of genome construction workflows is typically to identify suffix prefix overlaps among all strings. Only then we can think about figuring out how these strings have to be combined together, so that I can recover back my original genome sequence. So, let us look at back again the suffix prefix overlap problem, where we are given these strings, and for each ordered pair I want to report the longest suffix prefix match. So, what are the ideas? How do we solve this problem? Well, the naive way of solving this problem would be to look at these suffixes one at a time. So, for example, if I do a suffix prefix match of Si and Sj, I can try checking whether there is a suffix prefix match of length 1. If not, I will move further. So, I will check match of length 2, then match of length 3, 4 and so on. And observe that while checking a match of length k, I have to do at most k character comparisons. So, just a single match between Si and Sj, like just to get this pair, I have to spend minimum of Si comma Sj square time, because I have to do this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 until the length of the shorter sequence, right. So, and this is for only one pair. I will have to do this for all k square pairs, right. So, then I will have to sum this up for all ordered ij pairs. And as you can see, this is far from a linear time algorithm that we would like for this problem, right. So, how do we do better? Well, you can guess the first step. The first step is going to be building generalized suffix tree of these strings S1 till Sk. So, the first step is going to be building a generalized suffix tree of strings in a given collection S, right. So, this is done in linear time, that we know. Now, what next? Well, here we have to start looking at the properties of suffix trees. As a next step, what I am going to do is I am going to build a list that I will denote as LV for each internal node V in the tree. So, for all my internal nodes, I am going to build a list that I am denoting as LV, and this list includes index I if and only if this path label from root node to node V represents a suffix of string Si. So, if this path corresponds to a suffix of string Si, then I am going to put index I in my list, right. So, observe that I am talking about internal nodes here. So, if this path spells the complete suffix, then what that means is that it must have a leaf node which has a $I label, right. So, it has a edge connecting to a leaf node, and that leaf node, that leaf edge must have a $I label, because entire suffix has to end at the leaf node, right. So, this is just an observation that if LV is non-empty, then it must be connected to at least one leaf node in the tree. Okay. So, I hope this definition is clear. The next step in the algorithm is following. So, for a fixed string Sj, what I am going to do is I am going to look for the path from the root node to the leaf node that represents the entire string Sj, because remember that the entire string Sj is also a suffix of string Sj. So, if I fix my string Sj, then there must be a path from the root node that spells the entire string Sj. I am going to focus on this path because this path is important for us, right. So, this path that spells the entire string Sj. Now, observation here is that if you look at this path from the root node till the leaf node, and if you focus on any node on this path, then the sub path from the root node to the internal node represents a prefix of the suffix Sj. So, if I focus on this path, then this represents a prefix of string Sj, right. So, observe that this step gives me access to prefix of Sj, and in some sense step 2 gives me some information about where the suffixes are ending, right. So, step 2 gives me at what nodes are the suffixes ending, and step 3 gives me access to how to fetch the prefixes of string Sj. I have to somehow cleverly combine these two steps and build an efficient algorithm. So, here is the intuition how this will work. So, as I said, we are going to look at the complete path that spells string Sj, right, and each node along this path represents a prefix of string Sj as well. So, if I for example look at, for example, let us say there is a node ending here, then this node, this path label of this node gives me a prefix of Sj, correct. So, now I have to start using my list LV, right. So, LV tells me which are the suffixes in the suffix tree. So, LV gives me access to the strings from S such that PV is a complete suffix. So, if for example, if LV contains I, right, then that tells me that this particular path corresponds to a suffix of string Si, right. So, now you can see how we are going to combine these two. So, this, as we said, each node on this path represents a prefix of Si, and if LV contains I, then I also know that this is a suffix of string Si. Therefore, these two properties tell me that there is a common suffix prefix match between Sj and Si. But in my problem I am looking for the longest, so I have to look for the longest suffix prefix match, correct. So, for the longest suffix prefix match I have to go to the deepest such node in the tree where, so I have to go to the deepest such node on this path where LV contains I. So, suppose there is another node where U such that LU contains I, then this gives me a longer suffix prefix match between Sj and Si. So, on this path from root to Sj I have to look for the deepest node such that the list contains index I, and that corresponds to the longest suffix prefix match between Sj and Si, right. So, that as shown on the top right, it gives me access to the longest suffix prefix match between Si and Sj. So, basically we have to build an algorithm that computes these nodes, that identifies these nodes, right. So, one way to do that would be to, along this path I can start from the root node and I can keep checking lists, and along the wherever I see the deepest node containing any index I will report that as the longest suffix prefix match. But it turns out that if we do it for every path like this, so if we do it for every path, for example for Sj, then for Sj plus 1, for Sj plus 2, that is not going to give us the best algorithm that we want. We have to do this process in a single tree traversal. How do we do that? Okay. So, this is just repeating the step I said just now. So, the deepest node V on the path such that LV contains I gives the longest prefix of Sj that matches a suffix of Si. We have to find such deepest nodes for all Si with a single traversal of the tree. That is going to be the key of the efficient algorithm. So, this is how the algorithm is going to work. We are going to do a depth first search of the generalized suffix tree. We are going to maintain k stacks during the depth first search, right. When we reach node V during depth first search, we check the list LV at that node V, because that list gives me access to the suffixes that end at V. Now, I am going to put those indexes in my stacks, correct, and when I reach a node corresponding to a full string. So, for example, that would be node Sj here. When I reach such node, I am going to look at these stacks and I am going to output the depth of the top of each stack, because the depth first search works in a way that the deepest node will be at the top. So, therefore, I have to look at the top of these stacks when I reach such node, and I can just from the top I can access what is the longest common prefix match. Suppose I reach Sj here, then immediately through these stacks I can tell what is the longest common suffix prefix match between Sj and S1, Sj and S2, Sj and S3 and so on. So, this gives a efficient algorithm through a single linear time traversal of the tree. I can, whenever I leave node V, I pop that elements from LV from the stack. So, that is the standard depth first search way. Now, finally, to close this algorithm, we can prove that this algorithm works in linear time order m plus k square, and this is the best one can hope for, because m is already my input size that is the sum of input strings, and k square is my output size. So, what we are going to achieve is the fastest or the best possible runtime that one can hope for this problem. So, here is the analysis, that building a generalized suffix tree takes order m time, because that is the standard result, that suffix tree construction takes linear time. Now, these LV list can be computed through either during tree construction or after tree construction, because we can do a linear time traversal of the entire tree, and any node where we see a $i or let us say $j symbol hanging, then we know that this node corresponds to a complete suffix of Si and Sj respectively. We add it to LV, list LV, right, and because we know that the number of leaves is also linear in the suffix tree, the combined length of all the LV list is going to be linear. Finally, at k nodes, so at k such nodes, we have to analyze the stacks, and we will just look at the top of the stacks, and at k such nodes we will look at k stacks. So, therefore, that gives us k square time for the output, because there are k such nodes that correspond to the complete strings, and at such nodes we are going to look at these k stacks and going to report the final answer. Therefore, this step takes order k square time, and as a result the entire algorithm takes order m plus k square runtime. Now, this is again a non-trivial application that is surprisingly solvable in linear time by suffix trees. So, I hope this gives you a flavor of how powerful these suffix tree data structures are and how they enable fast problem solving for many complex problems. Thank you.